And we continue with the news makers here on 1400 KJFF, and we're joined in studio today by Dan Schaefer, and he is running for Missouri's 97th House District as a Democrat. How are you?
Yes, sir. Very good. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks. It's really a privilege to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, and, just kind of the ins and outs of what you're about.
So, I decided to start running. I was always interested in politics for my whole life. The first person I voted for president was Reagan back in 1980, so I'm dating myself right now. But probably around 2017 was a turning point for me. My son, like I said, I was always interested in politics, never really did much with it. But in 2017, my son, who was 23 at the time, and he grew up in Southern California, which is where I lived for many years, and he came down with type 1 diabetes, and then about 6 months later came down with something called Addison's disease. And these are fatal diseases unless they're treated properly. He was misdiagnosed, but we got through that. I ended up in ICU for a while, but we got through all that. And I started thinking to myself, I could be like, I'm an engineer, but I could also maybe study a little bit about medicine to figure out what's going on there. And I figured out it's way beyond my capabilities technically. So I started looking into the politics of medicine and how it gets manufactured and where it gets manufactured, and figured out that a lot of the base chemicals for manufacturing insulin and the chemicals that you use for treating Addison's disease, cortisone mainly, manufactured in China and India. And I thought, what's going on here? How did we allow this to happen? Because at the time Trump was president, and he's poking holes, and he's poking a stick at China the whole time, trying to get those guys excited. And how could this happen? And so I started getting more interested in politics. I joined an independent party called the Alliance Party back in 2018. I did their podcast for them for 2 years, faithfully every week for 2 years. I was actually the Missouri State Chair for the Alliance Party for about a year or so, which is really just a slot that I filled, didn't really do much. But kind of grew disillusioned with them. I broke free and then did my own podcast called Democracy on the Move, which I still do. Was doing it every week until last November, and I started getting more and more involved in politics. Got tired of talking about politics and decided to start doing something about it. Found out that District 97, which belonged to Mary Elizabeth Coleman for a while, and then last election, Mr. David Castile stepped up on the Republican side, but nobody was stepping up on the Democratic side. So I decided maybe I should step up. Really wasn't too sure about it until I called the Democratic Party, and I says, hey, you guys got anybody else running for 97th? They said, no. Would you like to run? I'm like, well, I don't know. Is it that easy, really? I just got to sign my name and I can run? And
it is that simple, isn't it?
It is, really. I mean, you have to fork out like $150 to,
right,
do some paperwork, and you got to drive out to Jeff City and meet the gang out there. And I was really impressed with it out there, by the way. But here I am, now I'm running and just ready to go like gangbusters. This is my first time out of the gate. I got a little bit of an idea what I'm doing because I've talked to a lot of politicians before, talked to a lot of book authors. I did over 200 podcasts, so I got to talk to a lot of people, interview a lot of people. And some pretty famous people like Ralph Nader, Teresa Amato, who was Ralph Nader's campaign manager for a while. And it was fun. It was fun. And so I know a lot about it already, but still, I'm new at this. We just got some yard signs yesterday. We're putting them out now, and it's a good experience.
Yeah, the one thing that is kind of good for you is you have time to build things up between now and November because you don't have to worry about August.
That's true. I still worry about it in some regards because I want to see. It's really my only data point, honestly. I can't afford to get polling done. I don't think David Castile's going to do polling either. So we really my only data point is to look at the primary and see what we get. So I'm pushing a little bit for primary. We're going to do some radio ads and things like that,
right,
just to get some people out and see what they're doing. I've been out there canvassing a little bit as well, so just trying to get people interested in the primary.
Yep. 97th District, of course, is the northern end of Jefferson County. I think it goes like rural Arnold out west towards Fenton for the most part, and actually, a little bit south in there as well.
Well, actually,
is that right?
That was right until the last time they did their gerrymandering, and so that district has changed substantially. It no longer includes Arnold. It actually just stays pretty far north. It goes from the along the whole northern part of the Jefferson County, St. Louis County line.
It's kind of
And
unincorporated Arnold, so to speak, I think.
somewhat, yeah.
Then it goes west.
Yeah, it goes down as far. Well, it goes down as far as I think like Romaine Creek. I don't know if you know where that is, and then it kind of shoots out west from there. It meanders up and down through different territories from there. But yeah, it's a lot of rural areas.
Yeah.
A lot of exurbs they call them, but a lot of areas like around High Ridge as well. That's which is I consider mostly suburban.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your background. You're a St. Louis area guy, right?
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis. I was born in Milwaukee, but grew up in St. Louis, North St. Louis County. Went to McClure High School, graduated from there, and then went to Mizzou, studied engineering, electrical engineering. Came back to St. Louis, worked here for a few years, and decided, I'm going to go to California for a couple of years and see what it's like out there. For a couple of years, actually turned into like 30 years.
Yeah.
Raised a family out there. Lost my job. The first time I was ever been laid off was like 2013. I was laid off. And I'm like, what? What am I supposed to do? I'm in my 50s already. Who's going to hire me now? But actually, a company here in St. Louis was interested, and they hired me. And I worked there for about 9 years. And then they laid me off again. But by that time, I was like 63. And I'm like, I'm probably not going to find a good engineering job at 63. I was pretty much into programming at that point. Along the way, though, my journey was pretty circuitous. I worked in engineering, but I also did a lot of marketing, did a lot of training. I was in sales for a while, not direct sales, but I was sales support, engineering sales support, which gave me an opportunity to travel the whole country. I mean, I actually travel the whole world. I been throughout Asia and Europe. Haven't been down to Africa or South America yet, but did a lot of international traveling. So it gave me an opportunity to really get to know people. And, I could be stuck in Bangalore, India for like a couple weeks. And, it's an entirely different culture out there. But when you engage with people one-on-one, you find out, they want the same things we do. They want a good place for their kids. They want to, make a good living, contribute to society. They care about their community. A lot more in common we have with people even on the other side of the world. So it was a pretty good lesson for me to learn.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, I was gonna meander. I mean, I have a tendency to ramble, so please cut me off if that starts to happen. No,
That comes with the podcasting, right?
Comes with the podcast, exactly.
Right.
Well, think about podcasting. You don't have to run commercials. You're not on a tight schedule, so you can just, if you run over, so what? We just keep talking.
Exactly.
It's interesting stuff.
Exactly. There's no time constraints or anything like that.
Right. But when I was in college, I worked for a radio station called KCOU. I was a DJ there. That was back in the days when we were literally spinning records and using carts and stuff. You and I, before we got on the air right now, we talked a little bit about that.
The
good old
technology,
days. Yeah, splicing tape and stuff. It's all different now. But that was a barrel of fun. I really loved it. I was a DJ there for, my slot was like Saturday night, 6 to 10. And I would just get in that seat and just rock and roll the whole time and get the party started out there. And then this vision of DJs actually, starting the parties and getting things going, and then they leave and they go to these great parties and they're treated like celebrities. Nah, it wasn't that way with me, man. I would get done with my radio shift and just walk outside and there'd be nobody out there. Go back to the dorm room, hang out, But anyways, that was fun. And so, yeah. But like I say, I meandered a lot. I got a lot of different experiences out there. Did a lot of training, did a lot of writing. So I feel like I've pretty well rounded in terms of my life experiences, and I'd like to bring that to bear as I check out the position for the 97th district.
I guess what are some of the things that you want to accomplish if you are victorious?
If I'm victorious, it makes it sound like, yeah, he's a champion.
Right.
Yeah, but, if you look at my website at danformo.com, that's the number 4, Dan4, or actually FOR works as well, you'll see that I don't really list that many issues. What I really talk about are my values.
Right.
And so the top of my values really, at this point, is women's rights. I know a lot of radio stations out there are fairly conservative, but women's rights tends to get conflated a lot with abortion, and it's a sensitive subject. And I would have to say I'm not pro-abortion, but I am of the type of person that really wants to put into application what the Republicans say, the party of small government. I want to get the government out of our personal decisions. So my opinion, when a woman has to make some difficult decisions regarding her reproductive life, these are difficult decisions. She has to consult with her, with their family, with her doctor. What she doesn't really need is some guy in a three-piece suit, known as a politician, standing in the doctor's office, telling her what she can and cannot do, telling the doctor what he can and cannot do, or he or she cannot do. That just interferes tremendously with our personal lives. But, to get up out of the weeds a little bit more, what I see is a tendency, since I've been around for a long time now, I see this tendency toward a more patriarchal type of approach to politics. Patriarchal means basically a fatherly figure, not mother, but fatherly figure who has absolute control. And this is, I think, we're seeing it affect women at this point, but we're also seeing it bleed out into the LGBTQ community. We're seeing it bleed out into the transgender community, to minorities. Basically, if you're not male, Christian, white, you're going to have some challenges out there. And so that's where my values are taking me. Now, as far as how that plays out, I think that was just thunder, wasn't it?
I think so.
Wow. See, that actually added some drama to what I was just saying.
Right.
But no, the way that works out is that, our rights, we have to continue to fight for our rights. And democracy is one of those things that it's not a spectator sport. You've heard that said before. You got to get on the field and kick that ball. You got to get out there and run with it. And, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Republicans are bad and Democrats are good or vice versa. Basically, we all have to participate. So when our rights come under attack, that's when I rise up. Another one of my values is education. Public education is under assault in this nation. And I'm a big believer that vouchers are taking money away from our public schools. Now, people scream school choice, but what choice do you have if you live out in some of these rural areas we were talking about earlier?
Right.
The nearest non-public school may be in the next county. And how are you going to drive your kids there? And so what you see are people who are sending their kids to private school, they now get some vouchers to help subsidize the private school. If you don't have the means to pay for a private school to begin with, you're not going to be able to send your kids to private school anyways. So really, money's just disappearing from the public schools out there. And I get it. People, they pay into the public education system. They think, well, my kids should benefit from it. I sort of understand that argument, but on the other hand, we pay for a lot of things that we don't directly take advantage of. We pay for the FAA, even though we may not fly airplanes or something. We pay for the FCC, even though we're not listening to every single radio station out there. So this is all part of the public good. So public education is under assault. Unions are under assault. If you look back to, say, going back to 1980, the 20% of the workforce was unionized. Now it's like 10% of the workforce. And you still hear, primarily from Republicans, okay, I'm not going to paint these guys as being bad all the way around, but primarily from Republicans, you hear things like, well, unions are too powerful, or they're getting greedy or something. And that may be the case in some cases, but in general, we're seeing 10% of the workforce now as unionized. And so we've cut the unions in half. And here's a really interesting thing. When I left Missouri to go live in California for a couple of years, which turned out to be 30 years, that was 1985, I used to see these bumper stickers that said, right to work is a ripoff. And so I lived in California for, till like 2014-ish. I came back, and I still see the same bumper stickers because the same issue keeps coming up again and again. And I know there are some Republicans out there, including my opponent, who appear to be somewhat friendly to the unions. I get that, but not enough. And I think that right to work is going to come up again and again in Missouri until we have enough people getting on the field, not being spectators, but getting on the field and playing the game of democracy and shutting this thing down once and for all.
Okay.
I'm a big supporter of unions for that reason. Now, I've never joined a union. I've never been part of a union. But as an engineer all my life, I've been a benefactor of unions. Where do you think the 5-day work week comes from, the 40-hour work week, the workplace safety rules? I'm going to just go down a list of many different things the unions have done for all of us, even though we don't all have to pay for it. But I think that if you're going to join a union shop, you should have to pay the dues for the union because you are benefiting from it.
It's been a long time since I had to deal with a union. I had the old grocery union.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was the last time I actually had to be a part of one of those, 655.
655. Was that
Local,
the salary?
it
Local
was
55. Okay.
Local 655.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is still operating to this day.
Good.
So
Yeah.
you work at Schnucks or Deerberg's, you're basically a part of that.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's other values I have. One of my biggest values is, and I listed on my website, is more democracy with an exclamation point behind it because I feel that democracy itself is under assault at this point.
Sure.
And I feel it's under assault from people who are gaining a lot from not being part of a democracy. Take a look at, let's go back to 1980 again. I want to make sure I'm not running out of time here. Go back to 1980. The top level federal tax rate was 91%. And now it's 37%? Now that's just for the really, really rich people,
Right.
okay?
Yep.
But for normal guys, the federal tax rate was right around 32%. And these are tax brackets I'm talking about, not tax rates. But now the tax bracket for their normal middle class is about 25%. Corporate taxes were 40%. Now they're down to 20 or 21%, something around there. So we've had this tremendous decrease in taxes, yet we're seeing an increase in the wealth gap. And, you know, I was talking to someone else in my podcast a few weeks ago, and he talked about Archie Bunker. I don't know if you know who he is.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sort of dating myself. But that was back in like the early to mid 70s. And he had this little story about this middle-class man who was able to afford, on one job, I think he was a longshoreman or a cab driver or something like that. With just one job, he was able to afford to support his entire family, had a house, had a car, was able to send his daughter to college. And this is a typical American story. Nowadays, you have both parents working, and they're looking for ways to have their child care taken care of because they can't stay home to take care of their kids. Now, if you want to talk about the party of family values, I have to ask, why is it that both parents have to work these days? And who's going to raise the kid? And what kind of a upbringing are they going to have if they're being raised by a child care system? Mm-hmm. So something is definitely wrong. We're seeing taxes go down. We're seeing the debt going up. In 1980, our debt was around, I think it was just less than it's around $900 billion, if I'm not mistaken, which today is almost our annual budget for military. Yeah. Now, this morning I checked, our debt is like $34 trillion. So, I mean, something's going wrong here, you know, and so we're seeing incredible wealth. Mm-hmm. We're seeing this thing called trickle-down economics, which came out of Arthur Laffer's, what they call the Laffer curve. I don't know if you remember that, but it was the Republicans don't like the word trickle-down economics, but it kind of stuck to them. But the theory was there, you give more money to the rich, and it trickles down to the people that aren't so rich, but that hasn't happened. So
I'm sure you've obviously seen this past legislative session, of course, too, how very little got done.
Yeah.
And it was not necessarily on the House side, because there were lots of bills that went forth on the House side. They just didn't get through on the Senate side.
Right. You're talking about state Senate, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure that was, as an outsider looking in, I'm sure you're probably frustrated by that. Just as many other, other state officials were as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you're cutting off my rambling there because I did want to talk about that as well. The Republicans are divided also in the Senate. And you see that there's this cabal of senators. They call themselves the Freedom Caucus. And they don't know the meaning of the word compromise. And they would rather hold everything hostage. I mean, this happens in the U.S. Congress as well, but let's talk about the state. They want to hold everything else hostage until they get their way. And if they don't get their way, they're going to take their ball and go home. And these are the guys that, I would normally target. And I would say, I don't want to sound too down on Republicans because I've actually gotten to know quite a few of them over these last few months. And but I haven't gotten to know anyone in the Freedom Caucus. But these guys are wrecking the state Senate. Now I'm running for a state House position. I can't run for state Senate because I'm in District 22, which isn't up for election this time. But you bring up a good point. We have to get back to a point where we're working with each other. And I think one of the things, and here I go rambling again, but this is a fairly important thing. As I mentioned, I got to know quite a few Republicans. And I tell these guys, like there's this guy, Billy Crow, who's running for the 2nd District in the county of Jefferson County. He's running against a couple other guys, Liederbrand and Jeff Ruda. And I tell him, every time I see him a lot. And I tell him, I says, I would love to vote for you. I'd love to vote for you, but I can't. I cannot vote for you. And because he has no Democratic opponent, once he gets elected in the primary, he is the presumptive winner of the general. So, but for me to vote for him, I'd have to pull a Republican ballot. Now, I've done that in the past because I felt strong about certain Republicans. But if I pull a Republican ballot, then I can't even vote for myself if I do that, right?
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. So this is part of what's causing us to divide ourselves too much. We have to get together and start working together. I'm looking at your counter right there. Is that saying we're going to go to a commercial soon? Or
Yeah,
something?
we are just about out of time, actually. Okay. Where can people find more information about yourself?
Sure. danformo.com. That's the number 4, DANF. Oh, I almost said FOR. Actually, that would work too, honestly. I got both of them reserved. But it's danformo.com. Just check it out. We're looking for more participation, looking for volunteers. Donations, obviously. We'd like to have people help us send out postcards, knock on doors, etc., and tell them, hey, the Democrats are coming back. At least in Jefferson County, we're coming back, and we'd like to have you consider us.
Thank you for coming in this morning.
Great. Thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Dan Schaefer again. He is running for the 97th House District in the state of Missouri, of course, the northern end of Jefferson County, northwest for the most part. And again, he's joining us here as part of the Newsmakers on Straight Talk 1400 KJFF.